It was an interesting home because my mom is half Chinese. My grandfather moved from China to a small rural town in Mexico, near Mexico City. It's called Pachuca,
Hmm.
Hidalgo, Pachuca. And uh, and my father, he was very proud Mexican, although my grandfather had, I think maybe he was half Spaniard, half Mexican. And and looking back, it was so interesting to grow in a very diverse setting, right? Although, I never thought of diversity back then. But my mom was very proud of her Chinese heritage. And my dad, he was an autodidact. He just voracious reader. He taught himself how to play the guitar, how to play chess. I mean, he everything that he wanted to learn. And he reminded me, as I was reading some of your Q&A and some of your essays, the curiosity, I think, is what
Hmm.
I always remember and what I bring with me. So if I were to pick an easy answer or a succinct answer to your question, I would say what got me here was grit and curiosity that I inherited from my parents.
Wow. Yeah. There's no need to be succinct though.
we
We,
can we can we can always expand. I have to tell you, I have spent probably 25 years in communication,
Mhm.
and I love communication. I love the written word. But one of the things that we would always talk about when my team and I trained, especially executives or scientists, in how to communicate their ideas so that they would land. We would talk about how in the Q&A, for example, oftentimes we get this question and we start with an inverted triangle, right? It's like we give a lot of background, which is the format almost of the academic paper, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's give a literature review and go here and there, and then we land on the thesis. But so we would always train people, use that triangle, get to the point, give a clear, succinct answer, and you can always expand from there. So I think that I
Yeah, you
I
practice
don't
what
know
you teach. You gave the succinct answer. All right, you're here because of curiosity, inspired from your family. It's
yeah.
yeah, it's wonderful. What's the most auspicious thing you've done in the past month?
I mean, this last month, it seems like it has gone so quickly.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I almost feel that this past month was all about really internalizing that I am going to be 60 and I am launching a tech startup and left a completely, perfectly secure, lovely job to do that, right? And even though we incorporated at the end of what is it, November,
Hmm.
it is not until this past month, that I feel that we really got into the the reality of it. What does that mean? Addressing some of the jitters, some of the fears that come up. I think in my Q&A, I wrote about how I always think back to a mentor who said, the greatest personal development tool you will ever engage is building a business, because it will make you confront your fears and your anxieties, and it will really force you to go through them. And I think that that was last month, going through them and reaching out to some people that I've been wanting to talk to, and then really realizing, I mean, what is the worst thing that can happen? I already knew that most startups fail. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm starting with that in mind, but
Hmm.
you just do the thing because it matters, because it's important, because you want to do it, and the rest, will add up at some point.
Yeah. So tell me, what was the secure job that you left behind?
Yes, so San Diego State University, I was, when I left, the director of international affairs, strategy, and communication. And I had been doing that for about 4 years. Prior to that, I started at San Diego State as the president's speechwriter and director of communications. And so
Mm.
I had spent 7 years in administration and putting together initiatives, international conferences, things like that. And I got to the point where, even though it was a great job, I mean, I really, really love the university. And in fact, I'm still very much connected to the university because
Hmm.
my startup actually was born at San Diego State University. And we are actually partners. We're 50-50 partners because if you know anything about, I mean, you mentor startups, right? You
Yeah,
mentor entrepreneurs. So you know this, but your listeners may not know this, that when you identify an innovation inside a university and you are using university resources, it really belongs to the university, right? So the IP really belongs to the university. And what happens is that you go and you report it to the office of the tech transfer office. And
hmm,
then you become partners, and different universities have different ways to partner with the innovator, with the scholar. Our university is very generous, and we become 50-50 partners on that innovation, not the business itself, because the business could have other products or
right.
consulting and things like that, but that innovation. And so I think of San Diego State University as a long-term relationship, and I am still an adjunct research scientist there. But
Okay,
in
yeah.
ter- but I'm not getting paid for that. I get to I get to continue our research lab on empathy in healthcare. I volunteer to bring the innovations that emerge from that research into the nursing program. It becomes really a laboratory where we test those innovations.
Hmm.
But what is so interesting is that that all started when I was doing my doctoral work. That innovation emerged from that, and I was navigating this amazing work that I became very passionate about while I was doing a very intense, high pressure job as an administrator. And as I finished my doctoral work and I began to present at conferences and began to see some of the feedback from, the attendance, the conversations that we had, it became very clear that this was not something I wanted just to dabble. I wanted it was going to require an investment of time and attention and energy and creativity, and at some point you have to make a choice, right? You have to ask yourself, do I choose the security of the paycheck month after month after month and stay in this proverbial hamster wheel where, in my case, I felt that I was at a point where I had created so many systems, so many programs. I had spent a lot of time innovating when I first started in those roles, but I was now in a maintenance mode. And I am not a maintainer. I am more of a builder. And and so I had to make that decision. And again, the older you get, the ramp gets shorter, right? And so every time that I want to do something, I remind myself today is the youngest you'll ever be. So this is the best time to do it. And so that's really what helped me transition, not necessarily, again, divorce myself from the university, but really shift my focus and my investment of time. Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, what a great attitude. I mean, you very much fall in line with the kind of innovator that I mentor. I mean, so many of them are university faculty, they're medical doctors, at academic institutions, they're researchers at academic institutions. They've got, some medical innovation that's come out of their lab, and they want to see that touch patients' lives, right? So how do you get it out
Yeah.
of your lab and to the patient? There's ways to do it where they get to maintain their role as,
Mhm.
you know, as a tenured professor, but
Right.
it's not easy. You have to find some torchbearer, some partner, somebody that's intrinsically motivated to take it.
To do that.
Yeah, I just love your attitude about San Diego State University being a partner and the tech transfer office being a partner. 'Cause sometimes that can be, sometimes it's an adversarial relationship or not the best relationship between, you know, the founders and the tech transfer office. They can butt heads a little bit, and I think it always works the best when you know, when you form a meaningful relationship with each other and you treat each other as partners. That's the best way to go about it. So it sounds like
Yeah.
you're doing it right.
100%. I mean, I could not have asked for better partners, both at the university and also my actual co-founder. And
Hmm.
so, and I, we can talk more about that, but I do want to ask a question. How did you get into mentoring those and, budding entrepreneurs or
Yeah.
scientists that want to transfer their technology?
Right off the bat, I was teaching my kids intrinsic motivation. Like you got to find problems, you got to be passionate about something, you got to create partnerships with the clinicians. I see a lot of in biomedical engineering, I see a lot of what I call transactional or needy relationships. In other words, clinicians need engineers to solve their problems, and engineers need clinicians to give them a problem to solve. And it's this transactional needy thing. And I said, no, we're not going to do it like that. We're going to form relationships between engineers and clinicians, and those engineers and
Mhm.
clinicians are going to identify a whole bunch of problems, and you're together going to be passionate about solving something and work together on this thing. And the result was, you know, 7 or 8 teams in this class, and we had 7 or 8
Mhm.
invention disclosures to the university. So it's like, wait, what's going on here? By the next year, my students won a national design competition, and you know the teams that were coming in, you know, second and third place was like Johns Hopkins and Stanford, you know, and so this put me on the map as like, wait, who's this young guy in Raleigh, you know, winning these national design competitions? And I rapidly got sucked
Mhm.
into some networks, the Wallace Coulter Foundation, Stanford. They have this whole biodesign thing. And so I had a seat at the table of what the future of biomedical engineering, innovation, design, and entrepreneurship looked like.
Thank you. No, I love it because I often think about how fun it would be to do what you're doing, partly because I've always been an entrepreneur. So I love entrepreneurship. I read a lot about entrepreneurship. I just eat it up. Um, and also, I love teaching. And one of my favorite classes that I ever taught, I had just I was a teaching assistant at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo as I was finishing my master's, and I was asked to teach technical communication for engineers. And I run the class similar to what you're talking about. They had to bring all the leftover components of leftover computers, any tech that is in drawers, in
Mhm.
boxes, trash, and they had to imagine a problem that didn't yet had a solution in
Mhm.
that a technology that didn't yet exist. And they would have to then articulate it, talk about it, talk about what it would take, similar to what you would do in real life. And then the whole idea was really to write a technical communications manual so that a lay audience could understand it. But they had to think of the technology, they had to create a prototype of that
Mhm.
technology, and then they had to write their manual. And it was just so amazing. And looking back, when I think of the innovations that came up, they were hypotheticals. Every one of them exists today, and so it's
Yeah.
so it's so funny. But I think of that class all the time. That would be like maybe for my next decade. That's what I'll end up doing. After I build this startup. But yeah, I love that.
Yeah, return to teaching an innovation course. It's so much fun. I mean,
Uh,
I feel like the students, I don't know what your experience is like, but it can be a little unnerving for the students to not have an answer. You know, it's like they sometimes they would want to know, well, where are we headed? And my response is, I have no idea where we're headed because we're coming up with something that doesn't
Yeah.
exist. So if you don't know it and I don't know it, it's gonna just a light bulb's going to go off and it's going to come
Yeah.
out of your head and it's going to light me up. So
Yeah.
we all get to win from this experience.
Yeah. And I think part of it is you have to move, you have to take action, you have to even just talk.
Hmm.
And actually that's what got me into technology.
Hmm.
One thing I haven't written about, or maybe I have, I was at undergrad and both bachelor's and master's, I was an English major.
Hmm.
And this was before I actually knew I would love to write because I just wanted to pick a major, but I thought this was at the beginning when technology was beginning to bubble up. I remember someone had their first email, and it was very new. And I remember thinking, I'm going to pick English because that way I will never have to do technology. and so, and so it, interestingly enough, as I'm going through my courses, one of the assignments as an undergrad was go interview someone who has a job that you want to have. And I thought one day I want to be a university professor. And I also knew how competitive, those tenure positions were and how hard it was to get one. So I decided I'm going to go and interview a professor, in English.
Hmm.
And I said, I know it's so competitive. What do I need to do to stand out, to really break through, all the applicants? And she said, well, if you are good, you're going to stand out. But if you're tech savvy, you will really stand out. And it's just like, oh my. But when she said that, I thought, okay, got it. And I never went and took tech classes, but I just became very curious about it. So I started paying attention. I went to the computer lab and I started playing with early versions of PowerPoint. And then I began to think, this was back when I was using the transparencies, right? You transparencies and you
Yeah.
went and you projected them. And then I thought, oh, what if I create like an illustration, like using clip art on PowerPoint, and then I can print it into a transparency in full color. Because back then, some of the classrooms were not equipped to project PowerPoint, but I thought I could make my transparencies very colorful to have conversation prompts with the students that they would have to write a story, let's say,
Hmm.
about some of the characters that I created in these transparencies. And so fast forward, when I was teaching that class, it was my first week teaching that technical writing for engineers. And I tell them about this assignment that we're going to have. And so I want them to brainstorm, think of a problem that doesn't have a technology yet. What would it be? Let's brainstorm. Crickets. Nobody said a thing. I mean, you have all these engineers that are thinking, their little brains are going, but nobody's willing to actually say anything. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this class is going to be horrible. I don't want to be in front of the class talking the whole time. And I was just trying to figure out how could I get these engineers to talk. And so I'm walking, I think I was in the teacher's lounge, and there was an
Hmm.
announcement, this weekend there's a Blackboard uh, faculty training. You remember Blackboard, right?
Yeah, I do. I do. It's bringing back some memories for sure.
I mean, so this was, this was the latest and greatest tech at the
Hmm.
time. They had just acquired it. And so I'm thinking, I'm going to that. And I went and I learned, oh, I can put up a discussion board online. So I go through the training, go home, create an assignment. I send it to the students and I said, okay, by midnight Sunday, you have to have two ideas, and then you have to comment to five of the ideas of your peers. And I just left it there. And I think I went that night. And by, I don't know, 4 hours, there were 500 threads of conversation. I could not believe it. And that moment just shifted everything for me because I thought, wow, technology can really create these moments where we can have context. And so
Hmm.
I could walk into the classroom and say, Andrew, that idea about that breathalyzer on your phone, that is amazing. Tell us more. Well, now the student already had context, had the opportunity to, feel confident to share the idea because he had already tested it, in the forum. So that
Hmm.
was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, such a good use of technology and just having those asynchronous conversations happening. So tell us about your startup. So for all this resistance of technology, then adopting of technology, and look at you now. Now you're starting a technology company. So let's hear about it.
Oh yeah. So I mean, I have been, that actually story put me in a position to be in technology. I was
Hmm.
actually recruited to do instructional technology, so I did that for 10 years. But what really emerged from my dissertation was, I mean, it's an innovation
Hmm.
where you are able to address the decline of empathy in healthcare, right? So we know that, measurably empathy declines through the course of education.
Hmm.
So I always think about, wow, these nursing students, these medical students, healthcare students, they come into the profession because they hopefully most of them they want to help people, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
imagine they come with high empathy. And by the time we graduate them, we strip it out of them. They leave with very little empathy. And then once they are in practice, it's even more, right? And of course,
Mhm.
there are many factors for that burnout, but in education particularly, what we know is that because the curriculum has focused primarily on the technical and clinical skills at the exclusion of the human skills, the students graduate competent on their
Hmm.
technical skills, right?
Yeah.
However, without even knowing it, they're stripped from their ability to connect with the other humans, right? So they see their patients as a diagnosis, as a case, as a number, as vitals, not as a human that is in crisis in front of them. When I was doing my work, I had already experienced what it's like to be in crisis as a patient and being dismissed and having to suffer for months and months and months because I kept on, being dismissed. Oh, just go home, just take Prilosec, just uh, lose some weight, I
Mm.
mean, just things like that without any further testing. And what ended up happening was that it was my gallbladder. And I ended up having to have surgery eventually, a, a surgery that is actually quite common that could have been addressed very quickly.
Hmm.
So that was very, very painful. And then a few years later, I was in another medical situation where I was almost at the brink of death because I was going into septic shock, although nobody knew it. Now, interestingly, I always think about had I experienced that with that first set of clinicians, caregivers, I probably would have died. I would have gone into septic shock, except that this particular team, they were so curious and they were so adamant, we're missing something. We are missing something. And I remember almost getting a little annoyed because the doctor in the ER kept on coming to me and said, tell me again what brought you here. Tell me again. And I'm thinking, doesn't he have the notes from the other nurse? Doesn't he, but I didn't get it. And he kept on asking, just looking for something. And I remember seeing him, talking to his team and then almost like jumping out of his chair, runs to my room. And then he says, does it hurt when you pee? And I said, no. He says, okay, we need to take a test. And so just one simple test revealed that I actually had a kidney infection and that I was pretty close to septic shock. And so I was able to experience both lack of empathy And then empathy, which is just being curious and listening and asking questions and being willing to listen to the patient's story. That is kind of context for what really excited me about studying that further in my doctoral dissertation. And so in my work, what one of the barriers to bringing empathy training per se into nursing education, for example, is that the one thing that we don't have is what? Time. We don't have time. I mean, we don't have time in the
Mm.
curriculum. It's super packed with all the technical training
Yeah.
that you need to have, you must have. And then when you go into practice, you don't have time. I mean, you have patient after patient after patient, right? And so saying, let's tack on a class on empathy. Well, first of all, we don't have time to do that. But the other piece is that empathy leaks. I always picture empathy as a bucket or as a tank of gas that has little holes in it. And
Mm.
that as you're going through the day, your empathy literally is leaking. You're tired, you have problems at home, you're burned out, all the different things that really strip that empathy from us. And so I'm thinking, okay, so if we don't have time, and actually, even if we add one course, it's not going to work, then
Mm.
how can we address this? And so, this idea of these micro interventions that we can just plug them like little Lego pieces on your Lego plane, all along the curriculum. And so that's really what we tested in my study and in the pilots that we've run. And so it's not a difficult solution,
Mm.
but in order for it to scale, it needs to connect with some type of technology, right? So we can do these interventions. What we do right now in our pilots is analog, right? So we go in, we immerse the students into the patient experience. We have a protocol where, without any didactic instruction, they're able to actually have this critical awareness of the factors that really keep you from paying close attention to what the patient is saying. And so we want to scale that through technology so that we're able to spread it across curriculums and schools and programs, both online and in the classroom.
Wow, so important. I'm curious to hear how it's going to be implemented in your technology solution. Before you go there, I'm just thinking about how you live this. I mean, how important this is to, I mean, caregivers, nurses, but I mean, in my opinion, I see the same thing in engineering, right? And I see the engineering students needing more empathy in their curriculum. They don't have it. And so many products are designed from behind a desk. And what's not happening enough is the engineers going and talking and spending time with the people that they're designing their products for, and so there's this whole empathy piece missing. But I also see kind of a similar, I want to say, it's like an overdose of time investment. Companies have recognized that connecting with the users, understanding the user's needs is critically important. And so you see these big efforts to do surveys and questionnaires and interview and come up with discussion guides and this whole thing. And it's this big effort that costs a lot of time and a lot of money. And and oftentimes people don't have the time or the money for it, and it doesn't happen, right? Or if it does happen, it just is this huge pile of information that everybody has to kind of sift through. And I talk to the folks that I mentor and say, hey, just do a little bit every day. Just like talk to it, just have one conversation a day with a human being. Get out from behind your desk and just talk to people and build it into your daily practice. And it will pay off in huge dividends if you just
Mm-hmm.
stay connected. So I love this idea that you're looking at it as like sprinkling it through the entire curriculum as opposed to, having a whole, class focused on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what you just said about having so much data at our fingertips
Hmm.
and not truly knowing how to act on it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, part I think of the problem that I've seen is that there's a bias for quantitative. And I remember having a moment where I was just so, maybe let's call it shocked, that how it was articulated. So I was at a lab meeting with a professor who number one led the lab meetings, and so he is, he has high hierarchy, right? He's the leader, so the students depend on his approval to get passed to their doctoral work. And I remember one of the students there who was doing a mixed method study. I now need to move into my qualitative data and I need to analyze it. Do you have any suggestions for software that I can use? And the leader said, I have no idea. I'm a scientist. And so I think it just flipped. I think he caught himself and maybe he realized, like, oops. But here's the deal, right? This idea that only quantitative data, it makes you a scientist, and qualitative data is soft, is fluffy, it's subjective, things like that. And
Hmm.
so for empathy, right, you have to be willing to slow it down to listen to the real stories, right? I mean, I'm a mixed methods researcher, and so I do value quantitative data. But
Hmm.
I think what has happened in also having the qualitative stories, the qualitative data, it actually adds the skin to the bones, right? And
Yeah.
it helps you understand the bigger picture. But I think part of what I'm hoping that I will do not only with this work, but also, the articles that you mentioned earlier, where I talk about the need to reframe our understanding of these soft skills or these soft, data points. It's really maybe just a matter of rebranding them. That's what got me started on Medium. I wrote an article called Stop Calling Them Soft Skills, right? And
Yeah.
I made a case for the fact that they are structural skills, that they are the beams that hold things in place when change is happening, when everything is crumbling down. Why is that? Because if I'm able to have trust with you, I mean, that is going to hold things up as we see these changes in AI and technology and disruption, right? If I am
Yeah.
able to collaborate with a team, we are going to move forward even as we're learning the new technology. So these skills that I think have not been prioritized because we have worshipped at the altar of tech, tech skills, of quantitative data, are the very skills that now companies are going to be struggling to really, build into their employees. You cannot just have AI do everything. If you don't have trust, if you don't know how to collaborate, if you don't know how to communicate an idea on stage in front of an audience when you are not in front of your computer, you are going to miss incredible opportunities to advance your work.
Hmm.
And so interesting. I mean, I've spent the majority of my career building those skills into people, into teams, putting them into practice. And I can tell you that technology can be amazing, but if you have a team member that is not able to collaborate, that is not able to build trust, that is not able to have difficult conversations, everything falls apart.
Yeah. We need more champions like you going around talking about the importance of the human skills, the structural skills, how critical they are. I mean, I I feel like this is what makes people special. Um, I've always felt like the thing that you need to do the job, whether the technical skill, whatever skill it is really table stakes. The example that I used to use for my students, I grew up a baseball fan, and my kid was playing baseball when I was teaching, so I used a lot of baseball analogies. I would say, hey, look, there's 30 Major League Baseball teams. And one of the most difficult positions to play is the shortstop. They're considered, that's typically the most athletic person on the team is the shortstop. And that there are 30 human beings on this planet that are the starting shortstops for Major League Baseball teams. I can guarantee you if you look across these 30 human beings, they are not the 30 most athletic baseball players on the planet. So what's the difference? If the position requires you to be the most athletic player on the field, then how come we don't see the 30 most athletic people in that position?
Mhm.
We see the people that have the communication skills, the leadership skills, right? The people that study the game and kind of understand, hey, where is, based on who's pitching and what pitch they're going to throw and who's batting, maybe where do I move myself in to have an advantage in the play. And it's all of the other skills that differentiate them.
Mhm.
And I just don't care who it is, whether they're
Mhm.
engineers, clinicians, all of the things that we have to know to do the job are the table stakes, right? Like if we don't have that skill set, we just can't
Mhm.
do the job. But the thing that separates us from the competition is our human skills, like how well we
Mhm.
communicate, operate in teams, collaborate, lead people without having any authority.
Mhm.
That's one of the
Yeah.
biggest that I see. And so I feel like this has always been an issue, and now with AI, it's just becoming there's almost like a spotlight on it, and I think now is the time. It's like I feel like you're beating the drum at exactly the right time to say, hey, these structural skills are the critical thing.
Yeah. And I think, when I think about some people ask me, well, why are you calling them structural skills? Why can't we just call them human skills? And they are human skills, but here is, you know, the misnomer, right?
Mhm.
Because they're human skills, the assumption that they are inherently um, fine tuned, right?
Right?
We
Yeah.
can we can talk, but not everybody can produce clarity in their communication, right? We all can write, but no, not everybody can actually tell a story that people want to keep on reading beyond the first line. And so the idea of taking human skills, making them structural, that means in my mind that you have intentionally invested time in fine tuning them, strengthening them,
Yeah.
so that then you can emerge with those human skills that are excellent, that they are strategic, right?
Yeah.
Um, one of the articles in that series of the Structural Skills Project is strategic storytelling. And again, I have to be strategic in how I name these uh, these skills, because storytelling, we are all storytellers, right? If you
Yeah.
get rear-ended on the way to work, you are going to tell that story to your wife, and maybe you're going to take some detours and rabbit hole, but being a strategic storyteller, as I write about it, is the ability to understand that there's a purpose in the way that you're going to craft this story, right? I mean, stories are wonderful, but the strategic storytelling is that you actually want to have a end to that telling of the story, right? For me, it's not necessarily manipulation. Of course, all these skills can be used for good or for evil,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Politicians can use them to manipulate people. But when I am talking about them, is you have to, number one, give the gift of clarity at the most basic level. Please give us the gift of clarity. Know what your main point is. What do you hope I will remember from your story? What do you want me to take away? And how do you want me to take action, right? You have to know that before you actually expect the audience to act on it. But most of us that come with those human skills and haven't taken the time to hone them, We
Hmm.
expect the audience to do the work for us. We want them to figure out what we want. We want them to understand the key points. We want them to take action. And then when they don't, we blame them. I've been telling them this for 10 years. I've been telling, if they don't understand, the common denominator is me. I have not communicated in a way that they can understand and that they can care about it and that they can act on it.
Hmm. Yeah, oh, man, I love that you're giving a language to these refined human skills, structural skills. I mean, just thinking about my analogy with the baseball player, it's it's a human skill to move, to have, to move your body and to have athleticism is a human skill, right? And so all of the skills, whether they be the athletic piece or the communication piece, they're all human skills, right? And so, what I try to look for is the required skill to be able to do the job compared to, the X factor. And that X factor is your structural skills, right? I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
everybody can tell a story, but can you tell a strategic storytelling? I love that. You know,
Yeah. I mean, and I think that that differentiator is intention
yeah,
and preparation, right? And
yeah,
then I would say in is intention, preparation, and generosity. Generosity in the sense that if I care about you as the audience, my generosity is in my investment of time, right? So we know Steve Jobs, one of the greatest communicators, right? We often think that he was just amazing because he was a good communicator, but we know that he, for every minute that he was going to be on stage, he spent an hour preparing for that 1 minute.
hmm,
I mean, how many of us do that, right? And so when we think of, I always think of when he used the metaphor of the iPod, right? So many people, I mean, there were so many MP3 players before him. Everybody was
yeah,
talking about megabytes and the space and all that. And what does he do? 1,000 songs in your pocket, right?
yes,
Coming up with that image that needs no further explanation took time for it to be clear in his mind and his ability to deliver it in a way that absolutely took your breath away.
hmm,
And so it is a generous communicator that decides to be strategic, that decides to take the time to clarify his or her own thesis, what the call to action should be, and then what are the stories and in what order should they be shared so that the audience can follow your GPS, if you will, right? Where
yeah.
they are not wondering, do we turn here? Do we turn there? Are we almost there yet? No, they're following along. And by the time you get to the end, they have questions for you. They want to know more.
I love this so much. Thinking about putting generosity into each one of these strategic skills, the generous storyteller, the generous communicator, the generous teammate, that wants the rest of the team to succeed. I mean, if you start to bake generosity into, the why behind being good at these skills, they become extra powerful. So cool.
Yeah. And when I've gone to do trainings, workshops, whatever, I would always tell people, you are getting double for your money because what you learn here is going to make you a better husband, a better wife, a better parent.
Hmm.
And so when you learn these skills, it will change your life. It's not just for work, right?
Yeah.
And we see it. I mean, my husband and I are going to be married 38 years this year. And I'm telling you, communication is at the core of longevity because, if we could not communicate, if we're not able to resolve conflict, if we're
Hmm.
not willing to listen to the other person's story and heart, what do you have? You have, a very fragile relationship.
Yeah. Wow. I can't agree more. And congratulations. It's wonderful to
Thank you.
yeah. Wow, what a great milestone. I want to, one of the things I definitely want to talk to you about is your position on AI. It's like it's one of the most nuanced positions when I read you talking about AI. It really resonates. I'll give you a quick anecdote that happened to me just in the past week in my Authbition publication. I've made it very clear, like human-made images only. Like there's going to be no AI images here. It's not a place for it. And in the same breath, like literally the same day that I'm putting this essay out into the world, I've got a mentee that I'm working with who's got, she's a clinician who's got a startup medical device company, and she's trying to communicate a very difficult concept to an audience. She's putting together a presentation. And I said, she said maybe I'll work with AI to come up with an image of what the concept is. And I'm like, that's a great idea. You should use it. So I'm like, here I am saying, hey, no AI allowed, and to create your image. And over here I'm saying, you should probably use AI to do that. That sounds like a great use for it. And so um, the whole idea of it's bad or it's good, it's right or it's wrong, and it's just so nuanced. There's times to use it, there's times not to use it, there's reasons to use it, there's
Mhm.
reasons not to use it, and you tell that story, I think, better than many people that I read. So I want to hear
Mhm.
your thoughts on the use of technology.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we are at an inflection point, right? So I have gone through several, I mean, and you have too, several inflection points in history where new technology comes and it disrupts, right? Now, we all have gone through that, but for those of us who actually work with that technology, pay attention to the disruption in a different way. And so I think back to, so I'm going to come back to the AI, but I kind of want to
Yeah,
set a context
yeah.
that when I was faculty member
Mhm.
working with technology using Blackboard, and I was recruited to launch Blackboard for a consortium of K through 20 schools. And they have no technology, and WASC, the accrediting body, had put him under notice that they needed to integrate technology into their curriculum. So I was the person to come in, bring the technology, bring Blackboard, and I had to get buy-in from the professors, the teachers, and some of them were great. Yeah, I want to use it, teach me. But then there were a number of them that were really resistant, right? And I will
Mhm.
never forget, there was one professor who was actually a distinguished professor for his teaching. You could go and sit in one of his classes and you could tell why. He was phenomenal, an incredible storyteller. I believe he taught biology and he was amazing. His students loved him, high rated classes, but he was being asked to integrate some technology. And so he was one of the harshest critics of it. And he felt, why do we need this? Some people
Mhm.
may need it, I don't need it. Anyway, so I ended up having a great conversation with him. And the one thing he said, I'll never forget, I don't want to disappear. And to me, it was just like, okay, I got it. And so we began to talk about how he could use it and maybe be the model, as a distinguished professor with giftedness in teaching. Maybe he could be the model of how we can use these tools without the teacher disappearing,
Mhm.
without the person that really cares about the subject disappearing. And it was a great reminder for me that in many ways, when we see technology like AI come on board, there's a lot of resistance, and the resistance comes from a different place, right? So there's a fear, there is almost like a protective mechanism. In your case, I read what you wrote about the images, and I'm thinking, I mean, I read it as someone that wants to honor the artists.
Mhm.
You want to honor those who actually have put their gift to with pen and paper or however they do it so that, we can continue, building, you know, the humanity that is among
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. But then you said also in your article, oh, but unless you're an artist that uses AI, like you're an AI artist, right? I
Yeah.
don't know if you added it later, but that's the inflection, right? To where we are learning, how is this tool going to help us? And of course, we have a lot of people that when you start using technology, they're using it for fun and they don't know how to use it. And then it borders, dishonesty, and all we go through that. And
Yeah.
I think that we are going to have to really be very thoughtful and reflective about number one is what drives our resistance
Hmm.
and be willing to talk about it. And then number two is there a way around the resistance or is it valid for some specific cases, right? One of the things as a writer, for example, that I'm dealing with AI, we all need an editor, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
we've all used them. I remember getting my first manuscript for my first book. Oh my Lord, I'm thinking this is horrible
Hmm.
because you have an editor that is able to see what you don't see, and that person makes you better. So is it dishonest that I had an editor that made me better and to produce a book that I was now proud to bring into the world? I mean, we've always used an
Yeah.
editor, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But here's where my problem is with AI is that the models have taken perhaps the best of writing and they have now duplicated it. And one of the things that drives me nuts is that now as a writer, I'm having to constantly reimagine how I can craft things because the way that I would normally say it is now a standard AI device that is constantly repeated. And so it may sound like AI when I did it first. Like if you read my first book before there was any AI, I used a lot of M dashes. I
Hmm.
used patterns like not this but that,
Hmm.
or I mean things like that. That now, if you read somebody's writing, you're seeing almost like this constant pattern repetition of things that used to be great writing devices, right?
Yeah.
So in many ways, it has forced me to almost be hypersensitive to the way that I write because I don't want, and again, this is what I deal with, right?
Yeah.
I don't want people to think I'm using AI to craft my ideas, which is kind of a normal fear. So that's part of the humanity coming out. But on the flip side, it forces me as a creative person to say, how can I reinvent even my own writing voice? Because I don't want this to become an obstacle. So that's where the strategic part comes in. It's not just so that I don't get flagged, quote unquote, as AI, but it's really more about if that becomes a question in the mind of the reader, then that becomes a barrier for them actually absorbing the ideas, right? So I'm doing it now more in service of the reader as an act of generosity
Hmm.
and as an act of creativity, but it started as a fear. And so that to say, that there's that nuance that our intention sometimes is misplaced, but it is what it is. And we have to explore it. And then how do I deal with that so that I can show up authentically to the page?
Well, it's especially interesting and vulnerable to hear about coming from a place of fear, right? I mean, if we can acknowledge that whenever we're using or not using something and it's coming from a place of fear, that's a good space to explore, right? Why, we might not even recognize that it's coming from a place of fear. So that takes some self-reflection to go and do that. I just my thing, and I'm an active user of AI. I mean, I use AI all every day, and I think the thing about it too is we've all been using it before it had a name that we called it, right? I mean, there's been AI in the tools that we've used for a really long time. And this is, I didn't put that unless you're an artist that uses, tools with AI. That wasn't like an add-on later. I mean that in the fact that it's pretty hard to be an artist, especially creating digital art without utilizing digital tools that might have AI enabled features, right? Instead of going out and maybe cutting out the image that I want to get, by pixel, I can use the AI selection tool to cut out the thing that I want. And if that's your job, if your job is a designer or an illustrator, you're an artist and you're using these advanced tools, that's to me, that's on the gray scale of totally unacceptable use of a digital tool that's a smart tool, in your craft, which is really different than I want to attract a lot of eyeballs to my essay. So generate an image that looks like this. No, try again, try again, try again. Let me just hit enter, enter, enter. And to me, that's just a shortcut. And what's interesting is that shortcut may make a whole lot of sense if you're a clinician giving a presentation at a conference and you're trying to get a point across and you describe it to AI and you say, try again, try again, try again until you get the image that's going to convey the meaning that you want. To me, that feels like a great use of AI, right?
Yeah.
No one's saying, that this person needs to go hire an illustrator to come up with this. It would take forever. It would cost way too much money. They're trying to bootstrap a startup, a medical device company. So, why then have have a publication that says, please don't do it that way, please have human made images. And there's just for me a brand consistency piece, right? If I go, decide to search the web for the results of a game that I was interested in and I see the summary, no one's making me a promise that that thing wasn't written by AI. No one's saying, you know, no one's making me that promise. So I'm not reading it with some sort of anger that a journalist lost their job because no one made that promise to me. In the world of Medium where we both write, there's a big commitment to these are human writers, right? And in that world of these are human writers, it feels a little bit brand inconsistent to say, oh, but by the way, the images that drew you to this article or this essay or the story are have been generated by AI. So it's like it almost feels like, oh, this isn't a place for that. This is a place that supports human writers. It should support human artists, and if it
Mhm.
supports human artists, let's have art that's been made by people. So but it's so nuanced, right? Like it's not a right or a wrong thing. And I've heard you mention a couple of times, there's a big difference when you just give your agency and creativity away to say just write this thing for me versus act like an editor, and come back and poke holes in it. I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense,
Mhm.
to utilize
Yeah,
it
and
that way.
it becomes a collaboration, right?
Hmm.
Even when I had my editor, that I remember my first draft, it was marked, heavily, and I actually had to have a conversation and to say I'm making these choices very
Hmm.
intentionally, and that's why I'm rejecting your changes, right?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I chose some changes. I rejected a lot of them, but then I had to tell her why.
Hmm.
And when she understood what I was trying to achieve, then the second, read, it was a completely different approach because she understood it. And so we learned a lot. I think you don't know what you don't know, right? And so as a first time book author back then, I didn't know I should have a conversation with my editor first to give her a context my stylistic choices, although I didn't even know I was making stylistic choices
Hmm.
until they were marked, and then I had to ask myself, wait a minute, these are not errors, these are choices.
Yeah.
And and so, but
Is that
even
are
back
you
then,
are you talking about a human editor or an AI editor right now? Because we're
no, yeah, no, I'm talking about a human
yeah,
editor, but
yeah,
I am using it as an example
yeah.
of how we can approach this AI editors or AI tools. I
Hmm.
remember back, a few years ago, I remember thinking, oh, if I could have 10 interns, every one of them would be busy because I have all these ideas, all these things I want to do. And I'm thinking now we have AI tools that you can see them as your interns, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That can help you expedite, the evolution of an idea as long as you are still driving the bus.
yeah. Yeah, well, it's interesting because I've worked with multiple human editors, right? And the the best ones come back and say something like, your takeaway message is unclear. Like I feel like you're trying to make a point, but I'm not. This is what I'm getting out of it. Is that what you intend for it to, and those editors end up making me think. I come back and I'm like, whoa, wow, I don't know that I don't know that the subtext of my essay is really hitting the way that I wanted it to. Or maybe I even learned something. I come back with feedback that's like, oh wow, there's a subtext here I didn't even know was in me. I need to think about writing this more. Right. So that's a human editor that really impacts the humanity of my writing.
But what you just described also is a structural skill, right? Some
Hmm.
people may call it prompt engineering, but really also you have to have the discernment.
Hmm.
You have to have the clarity of what you want and being
Yeah.
able to convey that. And you have to have the intention of what you want your end product to be. So in order for your tool to be as capable, as efficient, as useful as you want it to be, you, the human, you have to have clarity about what you
Mm.
want, and then you
Yeah.
have to have the ability to articulate it in a way that your audience, your AI audience, is actually able to assimilate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so here's another example that I can think about. Back back when I was really immersed in teaching this design class, so as early as 20 years ago, the students would have a brief opportunity of time, say, to interview a clinician, maybe somebody very, very busy, right? They've got a half an hour to go in and sit down with a neurosurgeon. And I would jump up and down with my students, like stand on the desk and say, look, you got a half an hour with a neurosurgeon. You cannot ask them any questions that you could have figured out at the library, right? Like this is an opportunity to figure out something that only they could possibly know. And I love how in product development, medical device design, all product development, we're building a business case. And I like the use of the word case because it's like a legal case, or it's like building
Mm-hmm.
a murder mystery case, right? Like you can't go into AI and say, you know, who committed the crime, right?
Right.
You kind of have to go down to the scene of the crime and with a notebook and interview a bunch of people and ask questions about what did you see, where were you, what did you hear, right? So this like building a case and when I'm doing my coaching with my mentees, that they often come back with information that they found behind their desk, right? They like sat there and they searched the web and they came back with a bunch of market research. And I'm like, no, no, anybody can figure that out, right? Like you're building a business case, you need to go and talk to other clinicians and patients, and you need to build a case that no one on the there's no answer exists anywhere, right? And if it doesn't exist anywhere, if it's not in a market research report, then AI doesn't know about it either. Nobody knows about it, right? And so the idea of utilizing the research tools we have, I don't care if it's like, 60 years ago and going to look at the microfiche, right, at the library, um, or if it's using Google 20 years ago, or if it's using AI today, it's like I'm going to use whatever tools I have at my disposal to figure out all of the basic things, the things that I don't want to waste the human's time with, and then go and spend that half an hour with that neurosurgeon to try to understand things that could only possibly come out of that conversation. So we don't use the AI to replace the neurosurgeon, but we don't say, hey, don't use AI, because then I'm going to end up going and wasting the neurosurgeon's time, right? So it's it it's a combination of using the technology and working with the people, right?
100%. I mean, I think that is going to be the greatest competitive advantage of anyone entering a field, whatever field it is. You have to have the technical competence of your field, and you have to have the competence of AI because that is a constant now.
Hmm.
But also, you have to have the structural skills. And that is, I think, your differentiator.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Wow. I love the way that you're bringing this to the forefront. Okay, so we've been talking for a while. Um, I'd love to hear some of the excerpts that you're going to
Okay.
read to us today.
You and I responded to a Q&A from the E3 publication on media, which is Entertain, Enlighten, and Empower. And so you choose 11 questions. I'm not going to read all of them, but one of the things, again, just to give you some context, I'm going to give you some context first
Yeah, I want
because
to hear
I
the, yes, of
think
course.
so. When I talk about storytelling, again, for me, strategic storytelling has been what I've been teaching for so many years, and so I always approach it that way. I worked with, at the university, tons of smart people. They were collaborating. I mean, I think when you added all the collaborators for this one proposal to be named, um, you have to apply in the university. For those who don't understand the university system, universities love awards and recognition, right?
Mhm.
And so oftentimes those very prestigious awards and recognitions you have to apply for, and you have to make a case for why you deserve this award. And so there's a criteria, to be named the top in your category. And so what you do is you go and you gather all the people that have done work, let's say in a particular department or a particular discipline, and what are we doing in this field? And you collect all these pieces of information, and then you put together a proposal, and then you send it out. So the university has been trying to get this award for a number of years without any success. And so one year, a colleague says, come, let's bring Maria in. Let's see if she can help us. And so you always wonder, why is it that a university that has done so much innovation in this area is not getting this award? It always comes back to how you tell the story.
Mm.
And because you cannot just plug in everything you've done in this discipline and expect your readers to make sense of how it all tells the story. Anyway, so I've kind of been doing that for a long time. And so when I answer these Q&A, I was thinking, well, I can even give my answers to 11 questions, or is there a story to this
Yeah.
process? And so that's where I came from. And so I'll start reading, and then what I did is I have act one, act two, act three. And so what I'll do is I'll pick one of my responses for each one of those acts. But the way that I started it was, of course, with a story. Living in Los Angeles in the mid 80s, my coworkers called me Miss Sunshine, bright, agreeable, capable. a yes girl afraid to disappoint, running on a hamster wheel I had built for myself out of the belief that being indispensable was the safest way to belong. But in my private moments, I question that pace and wonder how to step off the wheel and return to the life I had imagined when I was 6 years old, because that version of me was fearless. Every afternoon after school, I stood in front of a makeshift classroom teaching my younger sister to read and write, eventually, watching her skip first grade. I didn't shy away from the stage of my dreams. I stepped into it as it already belonged to me. Much later, I would learn that watching someone blossom because of what passed between us was a spark I'd spent decades wanting to recreate. And so for this challenge, I decided to look at the storylines that raised from my own story and then address them, as act one, which I call the spark. And so the question that I answer under that category was what enrages me about modern life. And not surprised, we've talked about this a little bit, the erosion of empathy and compassion. We've built a world that equates compassion with weakness, empathy with inefficiency, and human connection as expendable. Now, nowhere is this more visible than in healthcare, where patients become cases, diagnoses replace names, and capacity to see suffering has been systematically trained out of the very people meant to heal it. The truth is that empathy isn't declining because people don't want to care. It's depleted by burnout, by metrics that fail to measure what matters, by systems that reward speed, not humanity. The capacity for compassion is innate in most of us, but we've created cultures that punish it, dismiss it as optional, and whether inadvertently or by design, erect structures that suffocate it. So that was the first act of this exercise. And then I already told you what I spend a lot of my time thinking about, which is the terms of skills as a dangerous misnomer that implies these capacities as emotional, optional, easy, when they're actually structural skills and essential human strengths. Now, for Act Two, I called it the pattern. And for that one, I talked about the uncomfortable choice I made of leaving a lucrative career. I already talked about that, so I won't repeat it. But one thing that I rather not admit, I said, as a recovering type personality and academic, I used to joke that I missed the meeting when God passed out empathy. The irony is that my work is now all about empathy, specifically addressing its decline in healthcare. I have long believed that God has a sense of humor because this work didn't emerge from being the most empathetic or altruistic person. It emerged because I had to almost die to see that in its absence, we all suffer. When you find yourself in a hospital bed and experience being seen as a case, as a diagnosis, not as a human in crisis, every excuse you've ever made for emotional distance disappears. And sometimes our work and mission begin as a crisis turns into curiosity, and in my case, became also a company with a mission. And then for the last act, which is the landing, okay, so I predict with a dose of wishful thinking that the most valuable people in any room will be those who've done the hard work AI can't replace, sitting with uncertainty, wrestling with blank pages, staying present when every instinct screams to scroll. They are these are the people I want to meet, the people who struggle with writing, thinking, and creating a meaningful life. For them, for us, AI is an efficient army of interns at our command. We bring the moral compass, our empathy, our ability to leverage innovation for the good of others and to challenge injustice in our unique ways. We'll change the world not through fame or scale, but from small corners where we refuse to automate our humanity. So that was that. And then I'll finish with just a little excerpt of it's called The Black Room. And this is a very, very personal piece because one of the things that one of my goals I tell everybody that I am working on Maria 6.0. And this version of Maria is going to live more audaciously and fearlessly. And part of that is being complete, not scattered. And this is what this piece is about. It's called The Black Room: What Happens When the Voice You've Exiled Refuses to Stay Silent. So the Black Room was small, tucked into a spare corner of our home in rural Mexico. One wall had gone black, overtaken by the moisture that breathed and multiplied in the dark where no one thought to look. It was the early 70s, and no one had a second thought about how fast the mold was spreading, or why it may not be a good idea to let a child play there. A chalkboard stood in the corner. A map of Mexico hung on the wall opposite the mold. My father had set it up as a playroom, a play classroom for me after I came home one afternoon, buzzing about wanting to be a teacher. But one night, I wasn't there to teach my stuffed animals or my 5-year-old sister. The house was loud with the familiar raised voices that made my 7-year-old stomach clench and my chest tighten. The explosive fights between my parents had become a constant, low hum of fear that my father might leave and never come back. I couldn't sleep. I tiptoed out of bed to avoid my sister, holding back the shriek threatening to become a loud weeping. I crept across the squeaky floors to the black room where I collapsed on my knees and wept and prayed. It wasn't the kind of prayer I learned in a pew or memorized from a catechism book. It was it was an unbidden cry, a plea, an eruption that wouldn't be contained. I didn't know faith, not really. I knew it only through scattered images in stained glass windows, half remembered prayers, the smell of incense, the wooden pew on Christmas or Easter Sunday, a life size Jesus hanging on a cross, his mother, the Virgin Mary, mourning at his feet, but never intimacy. Still, the pressure had to be released, and so I prayed. If you truly exist and love me, I'll do anything to know you. One moment, one sentence, an innocent and desperate promise in exchange for a true encounter. The story we tell instead. We pick and choose. We maximize the easy parts we can pass on as tidy lessons learned, and we shut down the intimate supernatural moments. Sometimes it's because we don't yet understand them, and sometimes because they don't align with the personas we've created for ourselves. The ones with degrees and certifications, the ones called scientists and professors and leaders powered by strategy and intellect, not by radical ideas that might contradict or discredit the other. In my case, those ideas include faith and God. In yours, perhaps it's something else entirely. I chose the tidy story. The Black Room was also where I taught my younger sister, my first real student, who eventually skipped first grade entirely. That story I could tell. It was bright. It was evidence of something I could build an identity around: the teacher, the budding researcher who had a knack for extracting pedagogy lessons from second grade and bringing them into her little teaching lab. I wrote about that story. I spoke about it. I built a career on its foundation. But when we only pull the victories from our dark rooms, the tidy threads and the pieces that make sense in a professional context, we silence a critical part of us. The voices we silence. Ironically, the part we silence holds what we are searching for: the source and raw material of our creativity, the connection with our creator, the core of our calling and sense of purpose, the well from which our most meaningful contributions and most fulfilling endeavors draw life. We all do this to some degree. Most of us are extraordinarily skilled at choosing which parts of ourselves get to speak in a world that values evidence, achievement, and measurable outcomes. We learn to showcase the version that is presentable, the one that fits the narrative we've built, the professional, the achiever, the person who turned adversity into triumph. And we silence the other, the child, the artist, the pilgrim, the outsider, the marginalized parts we can't explain or don't want to defend. And so the rational self learns to perform and thrive in a world that rewards coherent narratives, evidence based thinking, and measurable outcomes. That rational persona learns to curate, to select, to build a story that our peers, our customers, and our followers can easily digest. But the other voice never truly goes away. It pleads for its right to exist from the floor of the dark room. And it feels like restlessness, even when everything on the outside looks like it's just as it should be. The price of silence and the promise of wholeness. That restlessness becomes pressure. It builds the way steam gathers inside a seal valve. You can ignore it for years, even decades, but it doesn't dissipate. It compresses. It waits for release. Because I felt that restlessness, I recognize it in my mentees, in the leaders I work with, especially the ones who have built impressive careers on the bright threads of their story and who feel underneath it all a quiet depletion they can't quite source. When we suppress a critical part of who we are and the still small voice calling from within us, it sometimes feels like burnout. But it's actually the fragmentation that follows self injury from self empathy denied and our bullish demand that we build lives on foundations that lack wholeness. And if we ignore that pressure long enough, it can resurface as unexplained illness, when in reality, it is the exiled part that keeps knocking from the inside. Exiled parts or exiles is a term coined by Richard Schwartz, the psychologist behind internal family systems. These are the pieces of ourselves we've locked away because they felt too raw, too vulnerable, too hard to explain. IFS teaches that exiles don't disappear, they wait. And the longer we keep them in silence, the louder the restlessness becomes. Take healthcare clinicians, for example, and I give an example of how this happens with clinicians who actually quiet the internal voice of empathy that brought them to their professions in the first place. But I'll skip down to the cost of this compartmentalization, it's always a hard one for me, is showing up as half a person and wondering why life, relationships, hope, and the work itself feels hollow and exhausting. But that not need be our story. Wholeness begins with one open window. My mentor has asked me for 20 years whether I've written about the Black room, not just the 7-year-old teacher story, no, the room, the whole moldy room. For 20 years, I said no, until now, until I saw it through a different frame. We are not meant to live partly in the darkness. We aren't meant to keep the door locked, holding in the voices that make us whole. We can learn from from our residents in that room and leave it with enough empathy to care for others who are still fragmented and locked inside their own. So here's my question. What does the voice inside the room actually want to say? Not the polished version, not the professional version, the raw one. The voice that once rose from a child on her knees in the dark room, asking for something she didn't yet have language for. Because I have done a little bit of that work, I can tell you that the answer might surprise you in its simplicity if you have the courage and patience to listen. For me, what it wanted to say is, I was heard. For you and for me, the answer on the other side of that question is only the beginning of a longer story we'll eventually learn how to tell. And so my invitation is really the possibility that your story, like mine, has at least one moldy Black room. a place where you've stored the beautiful parts you turned into professional gold, and the other voice you left behind, the one that gives meaning to your full calling in ways you may not have let yourself acknowledge. You may think that voice isn't useful because it can't be cited or proven or turned into a slide deck, but you don't yet know what you don't know. To know, you have to open a window, let the light in, and let the voice breathe. So, in the final note is I am eager to read your story of reintegration. In my case, the scientist who gathers evidence, the entrepreneur who leaps and builds, the child on her knees listening for wonder, and the other parts of me were never meant to live in different rooms. They've always belonged to each other. Some steady me with clarity and discipline, others keep me soft enough to play, to give, and to care when someone hurts. My hunch is that many of us have a version of this, parts we've kept apart because we thought they didn't fit together, parts that, if allowed to meet again, might change the way we build, lead, create, and care.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Heavy too. Um, it takes a lot of vulnerability to share something like that.
There comes a point in our lives where, as I said before, time begins to look like it's running out, right? I mean, not to
Yeah.
be morbid or anything. My dad died when he was 39. So I have lived
Mm.
my entire life with a very keen sense that when we say one day when I retire, I mean, it's just ridiculous because you don't know how much we have here, right?
Yeah.
And I read this book called Die Empty. It's a book for creatives, right?
Mhm.
Release your best work now. Don't wait until it has a trademark. Don't wait until, just release because there's never an end to the stories and to the ideas that you can put out into the world. And so I think for me, I talk about that all the time, but in order for me, the teacher, to remain as authentic as I need to be, is I have to not just talk the talk, I have to walk it, right? As we writers say, show, don't tell. And I think I'm seeing, a lot of people that are suffering, in silence, and they don't know why. And part of it is that splicing of our identity,
Mm.
where we decide where each one belongs, and we need to become whole again. And so that's what I would say, just as readers or as your listeners, consider that that may be an exercise worth, taking on.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's the brand of the show, right? Authbition, authenticity, finding our true selves is key, right? Who am I and what are my dreams? It's never too late to to go on that journey. I do feel like the longer it's like layers of undoing, right? I mean, my wife and I were just talking about this the other day that if you're in college, if you're a young, young student in college, you end up, especially I had so many students in biomedical engineering that went on to become clinicians, right? So why are you even going on to become a clinician, right? And so you might have already, buried a little part of yourself before you even entered into the field that you're studying, and then you lose that empathy along the way and you compartmentalize more. And I feel like there's just more and more compartmentalization. So who am I and what do I really like and what do I really care about stripped down to, the core is it's really hard work, you know. So it's yeah, anything that encourages people to do that, I think is critically important. So yeah, the work that you do is so meaningful.
And it's so fun to meet um, kindred spirits, right? From
Yeah.
across the world, across the country. So great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah, I agree, and it might be there's something special about writers, and I think um, writers are often they're trying to figure stuff out, right? I mean, so they're kind of like on this life journey of writing, just they're trying to figure things out, and so it's almost it's just such a great playing ground for running into kindred spirits, right? Because if we're not writing and we're just kind of, just moving through life like that hamster wheel that you describe, we just might not even stop to reflect to even realize that we're on the hamster wheel, right? We just don't even know it.
And
You know.
think the things that you will remember. I mean, I remember the experiences that I've had with
Hmm.
people
Yeah.
in person and even online. Um, if you tell me, what do you remember from last year of the work you did? I mean, unless it was a major event, I mean, there's so much minutia that you have to do on a day-to-day basis that just has
Yeah.
to be done in order for the good work but sometimes it takes so long, right? In
Mhm.
developing a company, for example, it takes so much work to actually see an
Hmm.
actual outcome, and we cannot just live for the outcome, right?
Yeah.
And the minutia that goes in between has to be done for that outcome to happen. But if I am not inserting meaningful moments with family, with loved ones, with people that I need, is going to be, you know, a waste of time. And then in the case of my father, if you get a diagnosis and you know you only have 6 months to live, I mean, what do you do with that, right?
Hmm.
I don't know if you do you know who Jesse Isler is? So he's a serial entrepreneur. He's married to Sarah Blakely, who's the founder of Spanx. And he's just I listen to him because he's a great guy. But one of the things that he is known for, and he actually is doing a lot of press right now on that, he calls it the big ass calendar, which is like that literally huge. And he talks about why having the script of your year visually available for you is so important. And what I learned from him, he was recently interviewed in the Ryan Holiday podcast, and he talked about that when you think about time in this terms, it changes everything. And he said, my parents, for example, let's say if you see your parents once a year, you may think, okay, so they're maybe 75, maybe they have 10 more years. And you think, oh, I have 10 more years with my parents. And the reality is you don't. You have 10 more visits with your parents. If
Hmm.
you actually, and so when you look at it that way, it's like, wait a minute, am I okay with that? Am I okay with having 10 more visits with my parents? Absolutely not. And so he shifted the way that he approached everything. And so when he has this calendar, he says the work will always be there. You don't even need to put it on the calendar because the Zoom meetings are going to be on your digital calendar. Everything is going to be there. But what goes in this calendaring is the life I want to create. And so the first thing that goes, like he color codes it, and I actually bought one that I carry with me. But but he says, okay, visit with the parents, it's like in yellow, and my kids and his dates and experiences with his wife. And then he has these, major, he calls it a misugi, I think it is that term in Japanese, where it's like this life defining moment that you put in your calendar. And he does that. And so he says, this is an epic life. And this is the life that I want to live. And then it's almost that visual, right, where you have someone put the big rocks first in a jar and
Yes.
then
Yeah.
the sand and the water, right? So it's
Yes.
similar to that. It's like you put the big rocks, the big things in your calendar, and then at the end, this was the script of my year, right? The other things, the Zoom meetings and the whatever you have to do will always, it's like the water that will trickle through the rocks and the sand and the gravel and will always find this place. But the other things have to go in first. And
Hmm.
so I think that that's why, like a meeting like this that takes 2 hours, I'm gonna make time for it, right? This, Andrew is a person I want to meet. This, Abby is a person I want to meet. And that's why we do those things, right? I will not forget this conversation. I will not forget this experience that I, cement in my calendar. Everything else, you know, will happen no matter what.
Yes, I love it. I love the big ass calendar. I didn't know that particular, I didn't know Jesse, but I know the big ass calendar, and I love the big
Yeah,
ass calendar, and I use the big
yeah,
ass calendar. Um, but yeah, I'm so with you on that, right? It's if we don't plug in the important things, the minutia of life just fills up all of life, and no, I don't want that. I'm fierce about making time for myself and the things that
yeah,
that's something that
yeah. Well, I listened to one of your podcasts. I
yeah.
can't remember the name, but where you were talking, it was the gal, the linguist, and she she was talking about, I think, was it Vienna or was it Prague? I think that
Oh,
she,
Prague. Yeah. Stephanie in
yeah,
Prague. Yes.
and one of the things that again stood out is when you were talking, when hey, we can live from all over the world, and I have that is my dream. Like I want to live
Mhm.
6 months in different parts of the world. That is my dream, right? But sometimes what stops you is the things that matter. And you talked about, we're close to my son, and he comes every week for dinner and these things.
Mhm.
And I'm the same way, right? We had an opportunity years ago to move to Guam, and I thought, oh, that would be such a great adventure. But our daughter had just started college, and I
Mhm.
just thought, I know that she just started college, but I just feel it's too far to be. And I'm so glad because I made the decision to turn that down, that opportunity, in order to be available at a drive's notice if something were needed. As it turned out, I'm glad that I stayed because she did go through very difficult times, and we needed to be present. But the moving to Guam or moving to Vienna or whatever we want to move, I mean, that can happen anytime.
Mhm.
This moments that we have with our, my mom is 82, and so I mean, again, the time is getting short. How do you put a price on those moments that will never be back?
Yeah, impossible to put a price on those moments. And then what's the big rock? Like what are our big rocks? It's for me a weekly dinner with my son is a huge rock, right? So if I put that in first, um, there's I'm not moving to Europe anytime soon, right? Because that
Yes. Unless he wants to come over, right?
But if
With
he
you.
moved, but if he, like, and the thing is I want him to chase his dreams, be his authentic self, and live his dreams. And if his dreams take him off to some other part of the country or the world, well, then, you know, we can evaluate different things, right? We've got then different opportunities
Yeah.
come up. So
How old is your son?
he's 22.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Great
Yeah.
age.
Yeah, and he's a young professional, full-time job, and trying to figure out where he wants to be and what he wants to do, and so I think the world is his oyster, and right now I'm just relishing in the weekly dinner, right? I mean that's the best, but he
I love it.
who knows where he's going to move and what he's going to do, and then we cross that bridge next. Um,
I love it. I love it.
Thank you. I'm curious. So you've listened to a couple of shows. I think you know a little bit about the whole mind game. Did you come to the call today with something in mind, like, oh, I wanna play this? Um,
For the opposites, yeah, the binary, yes.
yeah.
I
Or
well, the
yeah.
go ahead.
Or do you want to try to come up with something on the fly? I mean, I guess
Yeah,
I always want to offer to play with something that you're currently dealing with or want to talk about, I
yeah,
guess is what it.
yeah. Well, the one that I am currently doing, and I think I'm constantly talking about, is the dichotomy of or the binary of efficiency and empathy. Because
Efficiency and empathy. Okay.
yeah, and the reason I thought of that is because I recently was talking to somebody and how healthcare, part of the reason that empathy is in the decline in the actual practice is because empathy in the context of efficiency, it looks like an efficiency, right? I remember, I don't know if you know the author Annette Simmons. She wrote the Story Factor, and when she was in San Diego, I was talking to her about my work, and she said, "Oh yeah, empathy looks like an efficiency," and it was just so clear because that's true. If you have metrics that are about efficiency, how many patients you can see in a given day,
Hmm.
how many referrals, etc., then if I am stopping to listen to your story, if I let you to go a little longer, if I actually ask more questions, I mean, that is going to take more time. And so
Hmm.
I am not being as efficient because I'm being empathetic. And so that right now is really, I think, the core of the work. And so my argument is that we don't need more time to for empathy. We just need better integration. How do we integrate it? It's not another block of time. It's really, again, it's kind of the water that goes through the rocks, right?
Yeah, right. They're at odds with each other. It's interesting because I'm thinking about one of my favorite coaches that hit. His name's Joe Hudson. He's got a podcast called Art of Accomplishment. I've heard him a couple of times on some other podcasts, and I want to say that he's big on the topic of efficiency and big on the topic of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and well, not necessarily empathy. I want to say he talks more about emotions, like the emotional, like living in your emotional self, and being in touch with your emotions. But then he's also really, really big on efficiency. So it brings this to mind, like it is a ripe area to be talking about, um, that that dichotomy, that fight between what seems to be efficient and the battle with empathy. Well, I've never played efficiency and empathy before on the whole mind game, so I have no idea what's going to happen, which is the best part of the game.
Okay.
Um, I'm gonna write it down. I want to play it because
Okay.
it's um okay.
And
How
I'm
is
not prepared. I actually decided that's might be a possibility, but I don't even know what will come out of your game. Okay.
Good.
I'm
I don't
ready.
know either. Yeah, there is. I don't think that there's a way to be prepared. I guess you could
Yeah.
play it, you could play it by yourself and see what you come up with
Yeah.
before the show. But I think it's better when
Yeah.
neither of us have any idea what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, so I'll just work through the questions. There's six questions. It's what's the best and the worst and the best and the worst and the best and the best and then the worst of the worst of these two words. The idea is to try to boil it down to one word or a short phrase. I'm terrible at it. I always like have a whole paragraph of stuff that I come up with. And Abby has to say, hey, like you made up the game. Can you get it down to a word or a short phrase? I'm like, okay, yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try to keep my triangle.
We'll just see yeah, now you're good at it. You come out like right away. You're like you're gonna hit the point quickly, so you'll probably be a master at this game.
Oh Lord,
Well, let's start
the
with empathy.
pressure of expectations.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, life wants us to choose between empathy and efficiency, and the whole mind game is going to show us how maybe we can get the best of both. So,
Mhm.
what do you feel is the best thing about empathy?
Our ability to build human connection.
I'm gonna like I want to go to another level. So, like, what is the best thing about building that human connection? Where does that take us?
I think it taps into the very best part of who we are. Is not empathy for empathy's sake or to even give you the best care.
Hmm.
Empathy gives is a gift that gives twice
Mm.
to the person who receives it and to the person who gives it.
Yeah, agreed. So it's a gift. Um, what is the best of empathy? I'm trying to think in terms of when when I have absolutely no experience with something, it's hard to have empathy for something, right? And so I'm thinking in terms of, say, my engineering students who are designing a plastic part but have never spent a moment inside of a plastic manufacturing facility, as an example. Um, they don't they don't know what it's like to work there. So it's like almost impossible to have any empathy for somebody that you've never experienced their experience, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so to me, it's like the best part about empathy is that it drives us to understand other people's human experience, right? And
Mhm.
whether that's through reading their stories or going and walking in their shoes or visiting where they do what they do, how they do what they
Mhm.
do. Um, and
It's that you have it's
yeah,
immersion,
it's
right?
immersion. Yeah, yeah, right. It goes back to that clinical immersion where I put my students into the hospitals to find the problems. Like, you're not going to find the problems behind your desk. You got to go find the problems in the place where the
Yeah.
problems are
Yeah.
happening, because it's almost like, so that empathetic discovery. Um, so to me, wow, and this is, like I said, I'm really bad at boiling it down to one word. I feel like the best of empathy is that we are. I'm thinking it from like from a creator's perspective. It allows us to come up with solutions that are meaningful for the person that we're designing it for.
Mhm. You just triggered that empathy is feeling with.
Yeah.
I'm feeling in. So if to maybe riff off of what you just said, is that if empathy is feeling with, in the design context is designing with, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes a collaboration through the act of immersion and the product ultimately. I would call it an act of compassion because
Yeah.
in medicine, in I'm sorry, in the medical field, for example, where we want empathy, we want compassionate behavior, right? We want to
Yeah.
be treated with compassion. Compassion cannot happen in the absence of empathy.
Right.
Empathy is the trigger, right?
Hmm.
We have to have empathetic concern. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not going to get very academic, but even empathy can be very abstract because there are different dimensions of empathy, right? So, we have, empathy at the fantasy level, where, like, if you go to see, let's say, a movie, you are able to empathize with the characters, and if that is an ability in it of itself, that is actually a measurable
Yeah.
element of empathy. Empathetic concern is the emotional empathy that
Hmm.
moves you into action. Now, we can also have cognitive empathy, which is just knowing that saying thank you and please is a good thing. It's that, maybe nodding when I'm listening. And so that's cognitive empathy, where the behavior of empathy looks like this. And out of that um, intellectual understanding, I will act out empathetically, right? But
Yeah.
if we want authenticity, if we
Yeah.
want to operate from a heartfelt intent of care, we have to nurture empathetic concern.
Yeah.
And then once we have that, that means stepping into that story, stepping into that place of the end user, And out of that, then I can then act or create with compassion or with a sense of, deep care for that end user of that
Yeah.
product.
Yeah. You answered my question. So my one word, thank you, that you gave me is collaborative. Like, I
Mhm.
think the best thing about empathy is it's collaborative. And the way that I'm thinking about this is the healthcare provider, right? There's one healthcare provider that sees the patient, they're a number, they give them a treatment. But then there's another healthcare provider that when they take the time to collaborate with them, they might realize, oh, wait, you're going, you know, your child's performance is tomorrow. This isn't an emergency. Maybe we can start this the day after that or whatever. There's just like little things that when you become collaborative in the care of your patient, you might make different healthcare choices with them. When I'm designing a product, if I'm designing it in the presence of the place that it's going to be used, it becomes a collaborative design process. You talked about it with the stories too, your terminology of like the strategic storytelling and the generosity of not making the listener work so hard to understand what the point is of the story. I think it's a collaboration, right? I mean, it's probably even better if you can go and talk to and speak to the kinds of people that you're writing for in order to tell a story that's going to resonate with them better. It's a collaborative. So I'm going with collaborative as my best of empathy.
I love it. And it emerged out of our collaborative
It did. This is
conversation.
all right. So this is going to be an interesting one. The worst. What would you think is the worst thing about empathy?
It's exhausting. It can
Mm,
be exhausting. In the context of healthcare, there is such a thing as empathy fatigue or
mhm.
compassion fatigue. In oftentimes where we see a healthcare provider that has become jaded, perhaps is not lack of care, is self-protection.
I love that. The jaded resonates with me. I feel like when I think of the worst of empathy, I think of bias.
Tell me
And
more.
well, so when I'm trying to come up with a new solution, one of the most difficult things is is to think with a fresh perspective, right? It's the Henry Ford quote. If he asked his customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And,
Right. Yes.
right. And I think there's this it gets misinterpreted a lot. It gets misinterpreted as, oh, there's no reason to talk to the customers because they don't know what they want. So you just can come up with a car out of thin air and put it in front of them. And that's not what the quote's not intended to say that. The quote is intended to say, hey, you really need to spend time with with the customers to understand their needs, and they're going to be talking in terms of horses because that's what they know. They're going to say, and you can ask them, don't ask them questions about the car, ask them questions about,
Mm.
how much do you feed your horse? How often does your horse get sick? How much does it cost you to operate a horse? How often can you use it before the horse needs rest, et cetera, et cetera? What do you use your horse for? You know, and and if you understand all of the needs that they have, you can present them at some point with a car and say, would this solve your problems, right?
Right.
And so when I think about empathy, I feel like if you almost do it too well, if you like go and become the farmer, right, or the cust you become so much part of the farmer that you lose your ability to back out of it and
So
be
you lose your objectivity.
you
You're
lose
losing your.
yeah, yeah, you lose that objectivity, or you lose that, maybe I'll call it enlightenment. it's like the in design, there's this whole thing about like it's sort of having this enlightened view or this view that's of what's actually happening, right? And so, we can interpret something through a lens, and that makes us jaded or biased. And if we can kind of step out and see it from this enlightened view, we can see what's really happening. And what's really happening allows us to maybe introduce some solutions that no one would have thought of or are really meaningful to resolve the problem. So it's this empathy, I think, can put you into the shoes of the user to or the patient to the point where you're actually, let's think of it this way. Let's think of it this way. I'm trying to think of a good healthcare situation. Let's say that a really empathetic nurse is collaboratively caring for a patient at whatever the best in class collaborative care of their patient and executing at the highest level of empathy. But then they encounter the same exact situation, but it's with their parent or their very close loved one. And all of a sudden, some some colleague says, "Are you sure you want to be giving that advice? Are you sure you want to be doing it that way?" And it's almost like you've almost like overamped it to the point where you've over empathized it, or you've become jaded or biased by the fact that the situation, you're too close to it almost. And maybe I need
Mhm.
another professional opinion. Like, am I overthinking this? This is my own parent or this is my own
Mhm.
family member. Like, maybe I need a second opinion to come in here and look at this because
Right.
yeah. So,
So, and then I
yeah.
don't know, and maybe this is part of, what is emerging, right? And the problem with binary thinking, that the way that I would synthesize what you said is that empathy without discernment can
Hmm.
lead to, um, you know, it can lead to confusion, or it can, lead to bias, right?
Hmm.
But and so sometimes that I think that we don't take into consideration that there are factors outside of the concept at play, or the absence of certain factors that need to be at play in order for us to have a more nuanced and nuanced benefit, or
Yeah.
understand the nuanced detriment of that
Yeah.
particular binary.
Yeah. Empathy without discernment, the biased. It's what's interesting about this, and you said exhausting, right? So when we think about the why people reject it, right? Why, oh, we need qualitative information, not your empathetic quantitative stuff, because that stuff is exhausting, it's biased. You're leading with, you're leading with uh it's an emotional decision, right? And you're not making decisions based on the data. So we're just looking at the worst side of empathy when we have that opinion instead of the other side, which is that building human connection and that collaborative connection that happens when we do the best of empathy. Um, all right, let's move on to efficiency. What's the best of efficiency?
It's like efficiency is efficient, right?
Yeah,
No.
it's efficient. It's the most efficient thing.
Yeah, I mean, and to be clear, I love efficiency.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Me
And
too.
so I think if I would say what is the best part is that efficiency invites clarity.
Hmm. Interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
because I mean, in the context of what we've talked about communication, right?
Yeah.
If I am asking
Hmm.
you, okay, can you be efficient with your communication? And you know this, right? Because you probably help
Y-
your founders prepare pitches, right? And
Yeah.
oftentimes you
Yeah.
can do a 5 minute pitch. A 5 minute pitch is, a lot of people's like, this is ridiculous. Why do we have no? Because it's efficient. It forces you to have clarity about what you want to say, right?
Hmm.
And um, That's what I would say. It forces clarity. It
Yeah,
forces clarity.
I love that. Yeah, efficiency invites clarity, and putting it in terms of communication is perfect, right? Because it is a very efficient pitch when you can do it in a couple of minutes. So yeah, I that is a fantastic best of efficiency that I would have never thought about. I'm gonna say my best of efficiency is I'll say reach. Like how many patients I can reach or how many audience members I reach, right? If I've got a great pitch that's clear, I can reach, a room full of people instead of maybe, one person who can decipher what it is that I've been trying to say, right? Um, I feel like writing and podcasting and stuff like this is can be efficient because it reaches so many people, whereas my one-on-one coaching is feels very inefficient sometimes. Like it's like I'm reaching one human being in this, I'm giving them everything I've got in this one session, and it's I'm reaching one person, right? So it feels much less efficient. So when we can, well, if we had a choice to give good quality care to 20 patients in a day versus 10, we'd choose 20, right? If we could all get,
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah.
Here's where the nuance comes in, right? Because when you're talking about your coaching,
Hmm.
efficiency also, the nuance part is impact, right? And
Yeah.
so it's like, how do we measure efficiency? I mean, is it just by the number of people we put through? But
Hmm.
why, or do we include the actual impact it has, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, for example, I used to be part of a large mastermind group where I come in and everybody share their story and everything. And to me, it was exhausting and it was not efficient. Even though I think theoretically can think, oh well, I say what I need to say once, and then all these people can hear it and everybody can act on it. But actually, what I have found is that if I coach one person, I can be surgically precise in what I
Hmm.
deliver to them
Hmm.
that enables them to not have to interpret the nuance, but actually take faster action.
Hmm.
And those people are still trying to figure out what pieces apply to who and to what degree and where and when this person is able to execute faster, right? And so
Yeah.
if I were to, let's say, compare my impact as a coach and I look at the progress and outcomes, and I have seen it for myself, the time investment I put into that person actually yielded greater returns over time than when I deliver it at scale
Hmm. Hmm.
because of those. And so again, that's where the nuance comes in, right?
Yeah. I think you're starting to hint at what the worst of efficiency is. So if the best is invites clarity, and I think and my word is reach, I think the best of efficiency is we reach more people. Then the worst of efficiency,
Is we impact less people.
we impact less people. Yeah, it's lower impact.
Lower impact.
In
And I
yeah.
think efficiency, the worst of efficiency, I also, if we keep it parallel to the empathy language, I would
Mhm.
say it invites the illusion of impact, of high ROI.
Yeah.
For instance, in healthcare, we are just now beginning to see the emergence of business cases for empathy in healthcare, right?
Yeah.
When I was going through, you're familiar with NSFI Core, right? For those who
Yep.
don't know it, it's
Yep.
National Science Foundation. They have an innovation, you know, incubator, right?
Yeah.
And you have to go do customer discovery interviews, right? And in all these interviews that we did across different domains, one of the things that we found out is that the fastest growing professions in healthcare is actually the chief experience officer, the chief patient experience officer.
Yeah.
And the reason those positions have begun to emerge and be funded is because they are noticing the correlation between patient experience and the bottom line. When you
Hmm.
have a better experience, you actually have less lawsuits, you have less, complaints, you have more follow through, et cetera, right? And
Hmm.
so again, it's taken so long to be able to see that actual efficiency the efficiency metrics are actually costing you more money over time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because when whoever is creating these algorithms, these mathematical equations, they didn't think to plug in, right, the outcome of the patient experience, right? And we see so many cases where, I mean, and there are studies that have looked at patients who uh, had a empathetic physician, for example, and one that was very competent, and even the one that was more empathetic got highest rating, even if the patient didn't see better health outcomes
Hmm.
versus the one where they were greater health outcomes, but a dismissive or a lack of empathy physician. And so when they began to see those metrics, they realized, people care about how they feel, right? And the famous quote, right? People don't remember, what you said, what you do, they remember how you made them feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's an ROI in healthcare for that.
I love that, the illusion of impact. I'm going to steal a little bit from Joe Hudson. I mentioned him earlier. He's like big into efficient, like he uses efficiency a lot. And one of his analogies that he talks about is it's easy for us to recognize efficiency in an automobile, that the fastest car isn't necessarily the most efficient car. I think it's fairly recognized that the fastest car is not the most efficient car, right? That it guzzles more gas, it uses more energy, it costs more money to operate a very fast car, and one that is more efficient is less expensive to operate, right? And so the word efficiency is when it's attached to being fast, right? Like get more patients through quickly gives you the illusion of efficiency, but is it actually the most efficient thing to do? Is it providing in the long run, is it really saving you what you think it's going to save you? And I'm
Yeah.
very curious about that ROI.
Well, and I think that that's when you're talking about it gives you the illusion of efficiency. What I actually said is that it gives you the illusion of high impact, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it is how you define efficiency, right?
yep,
If impact is not part of your definition of efficiency, if for efficiency in your lexicon is merely, moving, things down a conveyor belt, you know, then you are actually getting the outcome you want. But if
yeah.
you want to be able to have impact, you have to choose. Now, here's where my argument is that you don't have to choose either or. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I'm doing right now and the work that we're doing is that I'm actually collecting stories and I'm asking very intentionally, are there micro moments, micro pivots that we can introduce that actually have high impact without sacrificing efficiency? And I'm so excited because the solutions are available.
Mhm.
I could go on with stories, but maybe that's a different episode. But the thing is that the answers are there. And we need
Yeah.
to listen to our physicians, our nurses, and our patients, because very much the way that you are trying to extract these ideas in order to solve big problems, that's what I'm trying to do in this world, of
Yeah.
empathy. I'm not saying, oh, you just need to be human and you just need to make more time for listening. I mean, that's nice too, but you know what? No, I love efficiency. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm an efficient girl,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so my drive is, can we have both? And the answer is 100% yes.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. All right. Let's have a little speed round on the best of the best and the worst of the worst. So let's start with the best of the best. The best of empathy. We wrote down things like build human connection and it's collaborative. And then the best of efficiency, we said it invites clarity and it has reach, it has impact. Um, so in just thinking of those words, human connection, collaborative, clarity, impact.
You see, I would not put impact as the positive of
Okay.
efficiency, because
Okay.
that's unless you qualify it.
Okay.
Maybe you could say clarity invites clarity with the potential for impact.
Let's say so how do you feel about reach?
Reach, yes, I like that better.
Okay. So human connection, collaborative, invites clarity and reach.
I like that.
What are those, if you can, not thinking about the original words, not thinking about efficiency or empathy, but just thinking in terms of what is the state of being in, being connected, human connection, being collaborative, clarity, reach. What is the,
So you're saying, so the positive of both combined?
yeah, like a one word or short phrase that combines the words we came up with.
I would say a phrase, the best of our humanity at scale.
Humanity at scale, the best of humanity at scale. Human connection, collaborative, clarity, and reach.
Or maybe generosity at scale.
Generosity at scale. Yeah, I love this idea of generosity because we talked about it takes generosity to be clear in your presentation. I feel like it takes generosity to reach. I mean, it's like it's it's spreading. It's generous. It's giving. Is generosity. It's a human connection. When you design or care collaboratively, it's a real gift. I don't know. I just like generosity. It feels right.
Okay.
Generosity. The best of empathy and the best of efficiency is generous.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we can really take this further. I want to look at the worst for a minute. So the worst of empathy is exhausting, it's fatigue, it's biased. And then the worst of efficiency is this illusion of impact.
Automation could be another word for that. Inertia could be the negative.
Motivation, inertia. I'm just thinking like it's almost like a succubus, like it's like something that's exhausting. It's biased, so it's biased, it's without discernment. So you're kind of like sucked into an opinion that might not even be really well thought out. And it's exhausting, right? So it's like and then it's this illusion of impact.
Mhm.
So it feels like succubus is the word that's coming to my mind, but I'm just this not a
I
real
like that word.
succubus. It just feels like okay. So what I guess I think I might have put it in when I answered the questions for somewhere. I can't remember where I put it, but it was this idea that we can use AI, say as writers, we can use AI to just reach the most people and just suck money out of the system, right? Like, especially a place like a place like Medium where it's sort of a raise all ships business model where there's, one membership fee kind of gives you access to everybody. And there's these, human writers who are pouring their souls into things. And then there's the people that are just sucking money out of the system. They're just going in there and they're just using a tool that's made for efficiency, and they're using the dark side of it, and they're just sucking the life out of things. And so, yeah, when I see the worst of empathy, I mean, I think we got it. It's just an exhausting, biased illusion. It's a succubus.
I like it. I like it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So do we move towards, I want to move towards generosity. I want to move towards the best of humanity at scale. And I want to move away from the exhausting bias
Yeah.
illusion.
Yeah. And I think in order to have that move towards generosity, you have to have discernment.
Yeah.
You can't do that without discernment, right? And
Yeah.
that's part of the value of the have diversity of thought in the
hmm
room, and to be able to have the skill and the willingness to facilitate a conversation where it's not divisive, it's not combative, it's really about the curiosity to emerge with the best way to tap into the positive attributes of both combined.